God has a specific purpose in mind for each and every one of us. A divine plan that if we follow it, it will lead to us to a greater future and a greater hope. The problem is, many of us wander through life aimlessly trying to figure out what that purpose is. Many of us question it, always trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with my life. We might be unhappy in a job. We might be unhappy in our families. We might be unhappy where we are in where we're living now. But the question is, what is God's purpose for us in Scripture? And God gives us a clear answer in Scripture, and it's up to us to figure out what is that purpose and stick to it. So today we're going to dive into a few verses in Scripture and to figure out what is God's plan for our lives. So we're going to start in the very beginning. Genesis 1. God created the heavens and the earth, and then he says, let us form man in our own image and give him dominion over the entire earth. So that was God's original purpose for mankind, was to rule the earth as his representation. We were created in his image, perfect, with his character traits, with his personalities, to represent him well to the entire creation and to rule over it. But unfortunately, Adam and Eve gave that position up whenever they chose to disobey him. And it led to a bunch of chaos happening throughout history, and it led to our corruption, and it led to sin and death entering into the world. But did that change God's plan for us? No. And God confirms that in Jeremiah 29:11 when he tells the prophet Jeremiah, during a period of Israel's history where they were in captivity to Babylon, he says to Jeremiah, I know the thoughts that I have towards you, declares the Lord, thoughts of peace, to give you a future and a hope. So we see in this verse, the word peace actually means wholeness. So it was always God's intention and plan and purpose that we would be whole. And in fact, the word actually goes on to mean lacking nothing, an ability to thrive in every area of life. So we see that was always God's design for us, was to be his representations, to thrive and show mankind that with him, we can rule the earth well. But like I said, we gave it up. We started doing things on our own, and we see that Israel declined and started going through these things that were the results of their own actions. And how many of us see our own brokenness in our own lives? How many of us actually experience wholeness in any area of our lives, at any point in our lives? Most of us don't. I know we all experience brokenness. We just experience emotional brokenness. We experience financial brokenness. We might experience relational brokenness. We see the divorce rates in America today are very high, even in the Christian world. We see that brokenness is very common in our existence, in our human existence. But was that God's plan for us? No. God says here in Jeremiah 29:11, I know the thoughts that I have to use. It's always been for your wholeness. You were always meant to be whole in every area of life and not to experience this suffering. But yet we choose our own ways of doing things, and it leads to further corruption and further chaos. So how do we experience this wholeness? And the answer is very simple. The answer is Jesus. God sent his son Jesus to the earth to set the captive free and to heal the brokenhearted and bind up our wounds. That's the answer. And Jesus is extending us an invitation saying, come follow me, and I will restore the things that are broken inside of you so that you can experience true wholeness in your life. So that you can live up to the calling that I have for you. So that you can live the way I've designed you to live. And many of you might have already said yes. But you still might be questioning, what am I called to do with my life? What is my purpose? And the answer is, Jesus gives us the answer in the Gospels when he says to these people, to the Pharisees who were questioning him and asking him what was the greatest commandment. And he responds very intelligently, and he says, all of the commandments can be summed up in two commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So Jesus gives us our purpose right here in these passages of Scripture when he challenges us to love God and to love people. So the question that we have to ask ourselves, when it comes to our careers, when it comes to our jobs, when it comes to our families, when it comes to what we want to do in life, or if we don't even know what we're called to do in life, but the question we have to ask ourselves is, am I loving God well? And am I loving people well? Because if we're not, then we're not living up to the calling that God actually has for us, the divine purpose that God actually has for us to follow him and love him. But if we are loving him well, and if we are choosing to love him in everything that we do, and to represent him in everything that we do to our neighbor, because that's how we love others, then we actually are fulfilling the purpose that he has for us. So that's the question that we have to ask ourselves is, am I choosing to love God? And am I choosing to love people? So the challenge for you today, as you think about your purpose in life, is to ask these questions. Am I loving God? And am I loving people? Hi, guys. So, over the next few episodes, we'll be diving into what Scripture says about God's main purpose for our lives of loving Him and loving people. But also, we're going to be diving into what Scripture says about how to find our secondary purposes of, like, where should I live and what job should I have. Over 2 years ago, God kind of led me on this personal journey of how to figure out my main purpose and my secondary purposes in life as well. And God challenged me to start using my creative abilities and to glorify him and to build people up. So I wrote a book called Invited into Destiny where I teach about this subject of finding your purpose. So I want to ask you to go buy this book. I'm going to link the Amazon link into the show notes, and I hope you go buy it because not only would it challenge you in figuring out your purpose, but it would also help support the ministry that God has asked me to start, such as this YouTube channel and the books that I have written. So I hope you do that, and I hope that you would be blessed by it.